We come to this moment. We come to this service, this time that we've set aside for praise and for hearing God's word and for prayer and for being in the presence of God and God's people. We come here with some history. All of us do. We are not yet a finished product, but time has taken its toll on us. It has left its mark on us. And so we've got some history. Now, when I say that you've got some history, I don't mean to insult you. I don't mean to say like they do about Sandy, there's a woman with some history. No, that's not what I mean. What I mean is that we all have a past, right? And we show the effects of our past in body and soul and in spirit. My body certainly shows the effect of my past. As you know, anyone who has tried to tell me anything, especially tried to tell me something discreetly, I'm deaf as a stone. And even with my hearing aids in, I don't hear very well. That's a remnant or a mark of my past, operating power tools and equipment and not wearing hearing protection. Let this be a lesson to you youngsters out there, as if there were any. My body shows signs of my past. So this side of my nose is flat because I used that side of my nose to catch a baseball when I was a sophomore in college. And if you look at my posture and certainly my physique, you'd say, there's a person who's spent too much of his time sitting, and especially sitting at tables. Our bodies and our spirits, they are marked by our past. And it's not just me. So if you've seen Don McMillan or Bill Ham walk around here, what you've seen are two people who have spent a lifetime at hard work and using their body as a tool instead of something more appropriate at hand. All of us show the results of things that have been done to us, the hard knocks that life has brought to us, the things that other people have done to us, things that we have no doubt done to ourselves. Some of them for good, and some of them for ill. But our past has shaped us. Our gospel story today is like an Oreo cookie, which is to say, not that it's tasty, but that it's two stories that have been interrupted. One interrupts the other. So we start with one story, the nice chocolate outer part of the Oreo cookie, and then we come to the middle part, and then we get the other half of the story after the middle part. The story opens today with Jesus getting off the boat. Now, last week, those of you who can still remember and were conscious during the sermon, it was about Jesus crossing on the lake to the other side, to the Gentile side. And the storm arose and Jesus stilled the storm. When he got over there, we skipped that story. And that's the story of the man who was possessed by demons, who had so many of them that Jesus, when he released him from them, sent them into a herd of swine and they ran down into the lake. Now he's on his way back. And he arrives back in Jewish territory, people who kind of know him better. And when he arrives, he's a phenomenon. I mean, they're interested in him. He's this upstart rabbi who's doing neat things. He exorcises demons. He brings healing about. He has these unusual teachings about God's mercy and grace. And he sits down with sinners and welcomes them. And so people want to see him. They want to see if he's going to do a sign, of course, but they also want to see if he's as bad as people say they are. One of the people who comes up to Jesus in this crowd is Jairus. And Jairus is the leader of the synagogue. Now that, my friends, is the sort of person who in an ordinary story about Jesus we would expect to be his opponent. We would expect him to come up and say, you know, we really don't want your unauthorized ministry in our neighborhood. Somebody who might sit down with him and say, let's have a cup of coffee, Jesus, and talk about the interpretation of the law, because I think you might have it wrong. And by the way, we're not keen on you sitting down and having dinner with prostitutes and tax collectors. It just does not do us any good. So that's how we would expect to see Jairus, who is no doubt a Pharisee. But in this occasion, Jairus is not an opponent of Jesus. He is not there to question him. He's there to beg something from him because his daughter is at the point of death. And so he doesn't care that Jesus is an unauthorized rabbi. He doesn't care that he's some upstart from Nazareth. He wants his help. And so he begs him. And Jesus begins to go with him to his house. And that's where we begin the creamy middle part of this Oreo cookie. Because while Jesus is being surrounded by people who want to see what he's going to do for Jairus and Jairus' daughter, and he's surrounded by them, then we encounter this woman with a past. Again, not like Sandy. A woman who has been marked by life, a person who has suffered. The Gospel of Mark has one long sentence about this woman who tells us who she is. And all throughout this sentence, she's described with past participles. Now, I know you didn't come out to church on a hot Sunday, summer morning to hear about Greek syntax or English grammar for that matter, but it's important to note why he does this, because the past participle is what has happened to us, right? We having been, right? And so he describes this woman as having suffered from hemorrhages for 12 years, having endured much at the hands of physicians, having gotten no better, but having rather gotten worse, and having spent all that she had, having heard about Jesus, and having come up behind him in the crowd, that long list of things that have happened to her, the history that she carries, the burden that marks her body, soul, and spirit, that's all in the past, because in the present she takes a moment and she touches him, perhaps with fear and trembling, but with hope for the future, that by touching him, she can be healed, made whole. And she does reach out, and she is made whole. And like her, we are people of the participle. We are people who have some history. Life has done some stuff to us. It's left a mark. And so we gather today, the people of the participle, having been diagnosed, having been laid off, having been estranged from people who love us, having been found wanting, having been guilty, having been frightened. Life has acted on us, other people, our own sin and failure. All these things have marked us. But Christ is present. And like this woman who came up behind him in the crowd, we too can act. We can do something. We can reach out. She couldn't go to the temple, this woman, because she was ceremonial unclean. Right? This is an ancient society, right? This is a sexist society. And so ideas of cleanness and uncleanness were very important. And because she was bleeding for 12 years, as long as Jairus' daughter had drawn breath, because she was unclean, she was not just suffering in her body, she was outcast in her society. She couldn't go to the temple. She couldn't go and participate in the synagogue. She could not touch a man who was going to go to the temple or to the synagogue. And if she had touched someone, they became ceremonially unclean, and they had to go through a whole process of cleaning themselves ritually, not physically, so that they could participate in synagogue worship or temple worship. And so her illness had made her an outcast. And therefore, the touch that she so bravely reaches out to take from Jesus is an unauthorized touch. It's one that she knows the law really forbids her to do. She was literally untouchable. But she did. And Jesus, we're told, felt that the power had gone out from him, and he asked, "Who touched me?" Which, of course, everyone wondered, what in the world could he be saying? He's pressed in before and behind by people all over here, but he felt the power go out from him. And she fesses up. She tells all. She tells her story of having suffered. She tells her story of making the decision to touch him. And he says to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." That sequence of events that Jesus, or that sequence of blessings that Jesus gives, is interesting. He starts first by calling her daughter, because maybe her deepest problem wasn't the hemorrhage, but maybe her deepest problem was that she had become isolated. She was cut off from human contact, from being part of her community. And so he says to her immediately, daughter. He claims her, not as an untouchable, but as a member of the family. You are my daughter. Your faith has saved you, made you well. You know, those of us who live in the especially western part of the world, in this part of the century, we think of salvation as what? Being set free from our sins, forgiven, given a new start, clean slate. All fine, but all wholly inadequate to the idea of salvation. In the Bible, to be saved is to be made whole, to be made well, to be put back into community, and to be put back together as one who has been broken and disintegrated, to be made whole. So her first step is to be brought into the family, then to be told, you are well, completely through and through. Oh yeah, go in peace and be healed from your disease. Now we know that you can be saved. That is, you can be healed, you can be made whole, but not be cured. Right? Many of us in our prayers have asked God to fix us in body and spirit and mind, or someone else who we love. And we're not always cured, but God always brings wholeness and healing to us. And you can be cured without having been made whole, right? You can be miraculously made well again by the wonders of medicine and still be empty and broken inside. One does not necessarily confer the other. But in this case, she's made whole, body, soul, and spirit. Everybody who saw this healing in this crowd would have wondered some things. First of all, who did she think she was taking this unauthorized healing? And who did she think she was touching a man when she was bleeding, making him unclean? And not just any man, but a rabbi. And not just any rabbi, but a rabbi who's on his way to help a person who really matters. The head of the synagogue's daughter is sick, and she takes this healing. And maybe she's taken away his whole ability to help anybody. Maybe when the power goes out of him to heal one person, that's it. And she stole it, and nobody's going to get any more from him. So you can imagine this crowd was watching this to find out how in the world Jesus is going to react to it. And then we also wonder if this means very bad news for Jairus. And while this is all going on, it does mean bad news for Jairus. Bad news comes. Messengers from his house say, don't trouble the rabbi further because your daughter is dead. There's nothing he can do for your daughter. And Jesus hears them giving him this news, and Jesus says to his companion Jairus, he says, look it. Don't stop believing. Don't stop believing. You came this far. You were looking for God to do something for you. Don't stop believing now. And on they go to Jairus' house. And when they get there, the professional mourners are at work. And yes, they did. In this era, they didn't put the obituary in the Buffalo News or up on the internet. They didn't hang crepe. They had professional mourners who went out into the street and they cried and they wailed and they pulled their hair and they ripped their garments. And they were poor people who earned their living by doing this to signify that there had been a death in the home. So when they arrive, the professional mourners are there. And Jesus says, what are you making such a fuss about? She's not dead. She's just sleeping. And he turns their mourning into laughing, but not in a good way. They laugh at him in scorn. These may be ancient people. These may be technologically very simple people. But dead is dead. And if you've seen dead, you really don't confuse it with sleeping. Those of us who have seen dead bodies, it's not kind of like, let me check closer. Is it really asleep or dead? And so they laugh at Jesus for saying this girl is sleeping. So he sends them all away. Goes in with just her parents and James and John and Peter. And when he sees this girl, this man who has been made unclean by a woman's touch on the way, makes himself unclean and touches a corpse, right? Can't do that either. He reaches out and he touches this girl who, because she is dead, is unclean. And instead of him becoming unclean,